Welcome back to the Permissionless podcast brought to you by the team at Guardian. And as always, we're going deep with teams that are building on the edge of Web3 and tackling some of the problems that are plaguing the DeFi and Web3 space. And of course, our discussion today with Daniel from Tokenize does not disappoint. Tokenize is building on a really exciting space, and they're at a really exciting spot, as you'll see in our discussion, where they're solving the problem of token deployment and management in a SaaSified platform. And they came from really a more white glove service, and now they're making all the tools and all the analytics that are necessary to manage a token available in an entire platform for founders. And they're seeing a lot of traction taking off. So we will get into everything that goes into the actual platform, but also Daniel's taken his experience on consulting for tokenomics and token structures and economic modeling, and also looking at the risk of tokenomic models, etc. And then of course we'll look at the market today and look at how some coins had exceptional tokenomics that worked in their benefit and really gave an exceptional flywheel for the protocol. And we'll look at some of the tokens that maybe didn't play out so well and look at, in a meta point from that, what is it that works in the favor of a protocol or against it when it comes to tokenomics and risk modeling. But of course, before we go deep on all of that, my name is Owen, and over 3.5 years ago, I founded Guardian, and really it started on the premise that DeFi would house trillions of dollars of assets, and that we would need a level of security that was really just a stepwise jump above what we had available to be able to ship in that environment confidently. And today I'm happy to say that Guardian has achieved the level of security necessary to be able to ship mission critical code. We use not only one, but two distinct auditing teams for every engagement, accompanied by a world-renowned lead researcher and a full-time dedicated fuzzing engineer for the scope. And together with all of these things in our model, we're able to gain so much confidence that we will actually put up our own funds as a bounty in a public contest for the protocol after our review, to be able to, first of all, show our confidence and also show the effectiveness of our model. And so really today, it's just a matter of time for DeFi to catch up. And now, without further ado, let us get into the discussion with Daniel from Tokenize. Well, first of all, of course, Daniel, thanks so much for taking the time to hang out with us and chat more about
Thank you.
the space and everything you guys are working on right now. But like I said, I'd love to start and just hear about, first of all, before even Tokenize, anything you guys were doing there, how did you find your way in? And we'll kind of see, how did you guys end up getting to where you're at right now? But how'd you find your way into DeFi and crypto in general?
It's a pretty straightforward story, to be honest with you. So when I was in high school, I thought I was going to be a chef. So that's fun. So that's, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago now. And I was doing my apprenticeship. So I did the full Monty, and then I just decided that I basically hated it. And then it was like 2 months before I finished high school when I decided to stop doing it. And I was a little bit, I was antsy, of course. I wasn't sure what I was going to move into. And at the time, my mum, she's still working in banking, and she was working in banking then. And she said, you should just jump into banking. It's a stable job. It's not going to go anywhere really. And you're pretty good at numbers. So I'm sure you'll have some good success. And so I got some interviews set up. I got a job pretty quickly. And so I started my professional career, I guess, in traditional finance. And ironically not enough, it was the hate from traditional finance that spawned my interest in Web3. So it was just like, I was very hyper aware of how much bureaucracy there was and how many friction points there were in traditional finance. It still takes like 60 days to settle a house payment, and customers typically hate banks and for good reason. So there were just a lot of things that I could see, especially internally, that just weren't working. And I thought there's got to be a better solution to this. And that led me into looking into white papers. And this would have been like 2019, probably. So typical story, I read a bunch of white papers and I got really interested in the technology, and I wasn't as interested in trying to make money. It would have been cool to make some money, but I was more just interested in tech. And it was about mid 21, where I managed to talk a company into hiring me over Telegram. So I just started reaching out to people, and I was like, hey, I'd love to work with you. I'll work for you for free. Just let me help you out. And I started working for this guy for free for like 6 weeks actually. I'd never met him, and he was living in Sydney. And then after that 6 week period, the company that I was working for free for managed to go through like get some fundraising. This was off the back of Outlier Ventures Accelerator at the start of 21 for them. So that was pretty cool. Outlier Ventures is huge. I'm sure you guys know who they are. And yeah, I talked them into hiring me, and then that was my proper first foray into Web3. And then after that, I've started to specialize just sort of accidentally in token launches. So really quickly, within 3 months of working with those guys, they were called Moda. Launched a token, raised like 10 million and 80 mil valuation. It was really quite cool. And then lots of Australians wanted to start to get into Web3, but most Australians had never launched a token before. So I would just like through networking, people were sort of said, Daniel, can you help me out? Is there any chance you could give me an idea on how to do a token launch? And that was where I started to move towards. So I got into consulting, got into token launches, got into token builds, project builds, all those sorts of things. And then eventually, it would have been this time last year, we got so goddamn busy. It was just like hard to keep up with the work. And so I talked to my co-founders at the time and I just said, could you build out a piece of software to make my life easier, just to make the token builds easier? And then I showed the software to some people and they were like, this is amazing. How do I get access to it? And that was basically what spawned Tokenize.
That's sweet, dude. It's funny how points of like hating something that you're doing is like always the impetus for like a big career shift. And I think it moved a lot of people from TradFi into DeFi, but also you wanted to be a chef initially and then sort of pivoted from, I mean, kind of for the same reason, right? I think it kind of fuels everybody's like big career decisions. I was actually a chef for, I don't know, I probably wasn't like as legit of a chef as you were training to be, but I was a chef for a
That's
couple of
cool.
years. And also
Yeah.
Brennan's brother, he's also a chef in the city.
Yeah, my brother in the industry
Well, there
right
you
now.
go.
Yeah.
That's so cool. That's awesome. I mean, I right now I still have some skills. My girlfriend loves it. So
Yeah.
Nice.
it was probably a really good thing to learn in my youth, and then I can sort of carry that on for the rest of life. It's pretty good.
It's
Definitely.
a good like party trick or like something
I
that's,
agree.
yeah, good like two truths and a lie.
Yeah. Absolutely right.
But what kind of cuisine, just out of curiosity?
I worked in everything. I worked in cafes. I worked in Indian food. I worked in burger bars. I worked in like a charcoal gyros place. It was just as many different areas as I could get my hands on, basically.
And it's a grind, man. Like I know the long nights. I can imagine
Yeah.
that. I mean, it probably helps you a little bit, coming into crypto when it's the bull market. Like, the 14-hour days are not unknown to.
I mean, yeah, I'm obsessive by nature. So I'll sit at I have no issues with sitting at my desk for super long hours and super long days. It's probably a little bit unhealthy. So I guess like everyone has to have it, right?
Yeah, I think we all have that problem for sure in this industry. It's like we're like moths to a flame with this.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I'm away from my desk from too long, I get withdrawals. So you know what I mean. Like you sort of start to get like the work angst starts to come up. Like I haven't touched the keyboard in a couple of days. Oh dear. So yeah,
100%, dude. And then, okay, so moving into the like sort of traditional financial world, what was it that made you not like that experience so much and then see DeFi as like the answer?
Ironically enough, it was mostly to do with just so it was friction points was one. This is a good example. When we used to work with customers to send an international transaction, it would cost like $25 just to send the money.
It would take time.
And so it would take money. Then you have to come physically into the bank. You have to fill out the physical form. Then we have to physically wire the money to wherever it's going to. If you don't have the right information, you won't know that until weeks later, because it's like it has to try getting to the receiver address, then bounce, and then you find out that it bounced, and then you get the customer. So you can see how it's shit basically. Like it's just so bad. And that was a really, really big key experience where I was like, okay, this just doesn't make any sense. And then I discovered like the Ethereum network and Tether, and that you could send however much money you wanted to, and as long as gas fees were low, for super cheap anywhere in the world. And I was like, well, that's just like an immediate obvious use case. Like why do banks exist if you can do stuff like this? And then it was sort of like, if I can do that with crypto, what else can I do? And that was really where like, I fell down the rabbit hole basically.
Yeah, diving off the deep end. And I mean, you came in such an interesting time, I think around 2019. That was, I mean, right before DeFi summer, and this whole explosion of like really interesting things that you could do on top of, of course we had Tether and all that stuff long before, but now you have like umpteen different utilization use cases, new dexes, new lending
Yeah,
protocols. So,
yeah. I
and
was actually at I was at work once and I was like tweeting out very, very voraciously. I was tweeting out, how do I use compound finance? I was like, what does any of this shit mean? Because I was still trying to figure, like, I didn't know what yield farming was at the time. I didn't
Yep.
know what was happening when you were supplying liquidity, but I knew that it was super exciting. So yeah, all these incredible things started to spawn so quickly. I remember vividly, like, so because of the way that work would work, you'd have to drive in for like hours a day. And so I would do all my research on the way to work. I do my 9 to 5. I do more research on the way back, like just on my phone, looking at what's going on. And then I'd get home and I'd sit here for a good 3 to 4 hours after work, just like doing more
Yeah.
self-education and trying to figure out how I can get my feet in the
Yeah.
door.
It's a very exciting time. Like I know exactly the period, the stage that you're talking about because
Yeah,
same exact thing with myself. Like just getting your hands on Ethereum and even learning like the underlying like solidity and stuff like this is just so like
yeah,
it just feels so new and novel. And it's just like I think it's the idea of the possibilities. Like what could this even open up in terms of opportunity for me personally, but then also like opportunity for like how can we shape the like the new financial system or even just technological system in general. I mean, it's
100%.
so exciting, so addicting. Those are some of the best times is when I was like just watching like back to back like DeFi MOOC videos, just reading like all of that stuff. But
The good old days.
yeah, absolutely. Now it's just like, okay, I just do this 14 hours a day and maybe I could use a little bit less at this point. Okay, so you pivoted into DeFi, started working for free with this company. They end up doing a raid,
Mm.
and then you get to this point where you launch your own token. Was it your own token?
No, it was the company's token. It was called the
Okay.
motor token, basically.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then this token, I mean, obviously, it sounds like you're pretty hands-on with this launch, and you
yeah,
saw everything that goes into it, and you
yeah,
start basically consulting for other teams that are launching their token. Is that right?
correct. Yeah.
And what is it that really goes into it? Like when you're doing a consultation, let's say project comes to you, do they just present you with the tokenomics and like their liquidity bootstrapping plan? Like what does that actually look like?
I love that you say liquidity bootstrapping plan as if anyone has a liquidity bootstrapping plan.
I do.
One of the, yeah, like one of the, so in essence, yes, without being too flippant, like a project
Yeah.
will come and sometimes they have tokenomics, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'll just have like a pitch deck and a really cool idea and maybe some like early traction or a product or something like that. So we typically work with projects when they're quite early stage, pre-TGE, obviously, and they come to us and we'll sort of look at their tokenomics and we'll sort of say to them, this is where we can help. The biggest key areas that we look at is so with tokenomics, there are two key parts. There's the design. The design is where all of the stuff that you guys will see, and it was just like the vesting and the token allocations and the fundraising and those sorts of key bits that you're probably sending out to investors and you're showing to the public and et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the token engineering, which is not development engineering, more like mathematical engineering
Yeah.
where we actually go in and we look at things like your ecosystem play. We look at things like staking mechanics, liquidity pool mechanics. We do a ton of different module simulations to sort of model out exactly how we think the token should perform in market, basically just based on a bunch of really good experience and a
Mhm.
bunch of good math and algorithms and all those sorts of things, right? So it gets super deep. And then what we also do with projects is we can help them actually get into market and TGE. So we've got like a pretty good partner network where we can work with like different market
Yeah.
makers and listing managers and different launch pads and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And physically get them into market and TGE them. Post TGE, what's interesting is that the biggest blocker that most projects have is they feel that once they've TGE'd their token, there's essentially no way to touch it afterwards, which is
Yeah.
actually like the total opposite is true. Tokenomics are your design might sort of be set in stone, like your allocations, depending on which areas you're giving it to. But what you can do with those tokens is never set in stone. Like you can always
Yeah.
do different stuff with them. So it's like, sort of getting over that hurdle. But that's typically how we like to work with projects. Yeah.
Okay, and it seems almost like so there's this whole like simulation and analysis aspect, and that almost
Mm.
seems somewhat similar to what a lot of these like risk, I don't know what you would categorize them as, like risk firms, like a Gauntlet or like a Chaos Labs. what they kind of do. Would you guys see yourself at all comparable to that, or is it like totally different kind of like risk analysis?
I can put my hand up and say I'm not exactly sure what companies you're speaking about. I do know what you're talking about when it comes to risk analysis and stuff.
Yeah.
And in some sense, yes. The way that we look at it is we like to create mathematically sound data-backed digital assets.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward because most projects are just what we've noticed is that most projects are not interested in the three pieces of data they can use with pump fun. Most people go
Yeah.
to that platform for just like sort of launching the next shitter, basically. But a lot of the projects that we work with are founders who are actually trying to create a legitimate business and
Yeah.
they need more control over their assets at the end of the day and more granular control over how the assets should perform in market. And so, yeah, we help to, alleviate some of the risk. A lot of the
Yeah.
projects come to us and they'll say, we've got 1% liquidity and we've got a $100 million valuation. And we just sort of sit there and look, well, that's going to die in about 3 months. And they just simply don't know because all they see is market hype and narrative and think that that's all that there is to it. So we help to, sort of correct that and give them a much better chance of success.
So what are the key levers? Like obviously there's liquidity depth, there's like fully
Mm.
diluted valuation. What are the levers that you guys pull to try and engineer like the most ideal outcome for a team?
So we look at all different factors. It depends a lot on what the project sort of narrative is. Say you have like an infrastructure, like a layer one. With a layer one of the key things that you're probably going to be looking at doing is designing some sort of grants program because as a layer one, you're infrastructure and you're trying to incentivize users to come and build on your
Yeah.
infrastructure. So a grants program is really useful for that particular use
Hmm.
case. But if you were like say for example, a DeFi protocol, and you were doing lending and borrowing, then you'd need some sort of yield program that's probably got something to do with either like a yield farming or like a
Yeah.
staking protocol. And then you design it so that you're not over incentivizing bad behaviors,
Yeah.
as in people just coming, mining assets, taking them away and dumping them, but more coming and actually contributing to your ecosystem. So it depends a lot on the use case and the particular sector that you're moving in. And then we sort of try to design out particular mechanics that will actually help with your particular use case. There are also other things that you can do just off the jump that are quite generic. So liquidity mining, like mechanics and liquidity mining programs are often always really quite useful because you're basically incentivizing people to come and deepen your liquidity pools. And the biggest problem that I see most projects having is having too thin liquidity and too high FDV.
Yeah.
Really good example of this was obviously Ohm. We saw that crash and they were keeping liquidity thin intentionally to artificially inflate the price,
Hmm.
but then they just hit way too much sell pressure.
Yeah.
We saw a 45% spike in their inflation rate, which would have been like super detrimental. Within 5 minutes, it was a 45% inflation rate,
Yeah.
and then it was dead within about 3 hours.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? Like there's push and pull. There's always catch 22s. And we understand what to look for when building out a good token, so we can help projects sort of give them the most realistic chance of success. Even though it's never guaranteed, the market will always do what the market does. But you can sort of help to what's the term? It's like the more you can do, the more you can do in the way of trying to give yourself the opportunity for luck. The more
Yeah.
likely you will get lucky.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. I love that approach, looking at the actual like underlying application and figuring out like how do we actually turn this into a flywheel with the token on top? Because the token really
Yeah,
is a tool of a protocol to be able to reach like the end outcome. Like any, like you mentioned, very different for like a layer one with like a grants program. I mean, I
yeah,
think it can really make or break an ecosystem. I think a lot of teams, specifically with like layer ones, have you either done a really great job of like incentivizing and bringing teams on board, or maybe not so much, and you don't hear about those networks
yeah.
so much. And then the same thing with like a lending borrowing protocol, or any kind of DeFi protocol. And I think it does get really interesting when you start to think about DeFi because there's all kinds of different DeFi protocols and there's
Yeah.
new novel ones that are getting spun up. So like there's just an infinite demand for how do we create the optimal flywheel for this DeFi protocol. And I mean, sometimes tokenomics alone can pretty much just carry a project if you have the right incentives. I mean, I think Olympus was kind of a great example of like if you just get the right incentives and you get the right
Yeah.
like little, I mean, dare I say Ponzi-nomics, but if you get the right incentive, then the flywheel will just, carry itself.
Well, their bonds were really quite novel when they came out with them. And
Yeah.
it was I remember watching what was happening. Like Olympus was doing it. There was another one called Wonderland Time, which was doing it. It was all really quite cool. I think it's fun to sort of look back because like I think about 2021 as like very, very experimental. And I think about now, and it's still pretty experimental. Like I don't think
Yeah.
anyone's really quite cracked it just yet, which is quite cool. And I think to your point earlier, when I speak with projects, the way that I sort of frame up their tokenomics is it's sort of like the secondary product of the business.
Yeah.
Sometimes people get too focused in. Sometimes they think it's the primary product. It never is.
Yeah.
The primary product is whatever the protocol or the platform is actually building. But the tokenomics is definitely the secondary product of the entire protocol, and you need to treat it with the same sort of gravitas that you would an
Yeah.
actual product rollout.
Yeah, I think that has been a key like learning point for really the industry as a whole is that, like you said, like the token is not front and center the main
No.
product. There's got to be like an actual, there has to be something. It could just be like vaporware with a
Yeah.
token, which I think was most things, if we go back
Yeah.
3, 4 years, was exactly that. Now I think the general crypto populace has figured out how to discern whether something was actually a good opportunity, if if this token actually has something behind it. I think the most successful projects that I've seen recently have the product far before they have the token. And then they
Yeah.
launch the token into a ton of pent-up demand. And the launches are like sometimes crazy. I think obviously like hype was an insane one. Yeah, I think that's definitely the model. One smaller one that I really loved recently was Dolomite. I mean, Dolomite, I don't know if you've heard of Dolomite, but
No,
they've
I
been,
haven't.
yeah, dude, they've been building in DeFi for years at this point, and they just recently launched their token, and they've already hit like $1 billion in AUM
Awesome.
before they even launched the token. And I mean, their team's just insanely solid technically as well. But yeah, so I definitely love the idea of getting the product fundamentals right, get some actual revenue generated, and then
Yeah.
that's when the token comes in to add like gas to the fire and sort of like as a flywheel on top of like an initial spark. So yeah, definitely agree
Yeah.
with that. And
I couldn't
also
agree more.
there's constantly been this battle of like tokens need to have utility, tokens don't need to have utility. I'm interested to hear like what's your, I mean, obviously, like you said, it's on a case by case basis, but like,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that debate, especially in like today's market?
I have a bit of a hot take on the utility debate, to be super honest.
Yeah,
My opinion is that most project utility is essentially bullshit. The way that I look at it is that everyone collectively realized that if a token was a utility token, then the SEC won't crawl up our asses about launching unregistered securities. And so if that's the case, then well, maybe I want to really fundraise for my Web3 project, and maybe the VCs I'm talking to don't want to wait 10 years for an exit. They'd rather only wait 18 months. And so they really want me to do a token. So if I just create a security and then build a thin layer of utility on top, I can get out of regulatory purgatory.
yeah,
And that's essentially how I see 99% of projects in the space. There are some projects like that definitely have utility that like just are baked in. Like infrastructure platforms are a really good example of this. DeFi protocols are a good example of this. There are definitely projects that require tokens for utility. But I
yeah,
think in general, most of it is basically thinly veiled horseshit.
yeah,
That is the most of it. And I think I do think, however, that I'd like to see a shift here in two directions. The first one is that as regulation starts to catch up and things get better and better and better, I think it'll get more and more easy to potentially be launching securities as long as you're doing it regulated and as long as you're doing it compliantly and with the correct sort of like licenses to do so. You know, the UAE is making a huge effort in sort of moving in that area. The Varo license is very good to be able to do regulated securities and not necessarily get in trouble. And then the other side of it is actually doing things that have legitimate utility. So a good example of this, something that I've been thinking about a lot at the moment is data tokenization. One of the biggest problems that with just data privacy and with data sharing and anything to do with of that nature is that it's all really quite sensitive and companies don't necessarily want to be sharing data with each other.
yeah,
But as AI becomes a larger and larger piece of the puzzle, the whole world is sort of seeing it just explode out of thin air, basically. They are going to need to find ways to use data better. If AIs want to get better, they're going to need new data to be trained on. And proprietary data being sitting in silos within these large companies is probably not going to fit the bill. I imagine there's going to have to be some sort of crossover at some point. And I think actually the easiest way to do that is through commerce. You imagine you have two data packets have been tokenized, and an LLM is trying to figure out which of those data packets it needs to buy without looking at the data and breaching
Yep.
privacy concerns. And the way that it could do this is the value of the data. If one data packet is $100 and the other data packet is $10, the inference is that the data packet that costs $100 is more useful. And so an ecosystem that has utility tokens that enable this, that's true utilitarian. And I think that makes a lot of sense because you're not actually creating this economy for speculation or to improve value. You're rather trying to create the economy to enable commerce between two entities, basically, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think there's a divergence. I think if we're going to launch securities, let's sort of just come out the closet and start launching securities. And then if we're launching actual utility tokens, let's look at actual utility rather than just thin veiled, I'm not a security utility.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, I mean, like you said, with the regulatory environment sort of clearing up around this, I mean, big change at the SEC. Have you guys seen any interest from folks even like outside of the DeFi/crypto space in launching a token? Has there been any kind of whispers on that side?
All of it is coming from the UAE for me. So like loads of different companies, like funds, hedge funds, just like any capital at the moment are all looking at ways to sort of get into regulated securities in somewhere or another. And it's mostly because they have quite deep wallets. So for them, getting a regulatory license and then going out and launching the securities is less of a problem than it would be with someone who's like bootstrapped, like a small startup, right? So yeah, so for me, it's coming out of that area. I think also in part too, because the UAE is super big on tokenizing real world assets and especially real estate at the moment. So that's just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger over there. They ran out of oil a couple of years ago, so they're really quite interested in sort of innovating and becoming a technology hub, which I think is incredible. And so that's where a lot of the, so to speak, Chinese whispers are coming from, for me anyway.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And I guess so. Obviously, we've talked about all the different ways that like a token launch can go wrong or just be like kind of flawed from the outset. What do you is like an example of a token launch, maybe recently even, that you felt went really well? Like, what does it look like when it's pulled off flawlessly?
Who is a really good example of this? I'm thinking about different companies. I think Bearer had a bit of a shit start. Some of the DeFi tokens, like DeFi, DEFAI, could be an interesting sort of thinking for a second. So Virtual's protocol is an example. Now, they didn't necessarily launch out the gate strong. However, they launched their token into a market that was, they had a product, they had a lot of really good use cases. And then as the market started to heat up in DeFi, they just exploded. They shot right up to a $4 billion valuation, I think, at peak. Now, when this was happening, I actually reviewed them. This would have been back in November or December. And I sort of said, my biggest concern right now is that their currency, their Virtuals token, is being used as the default asset for a platform that requires growth rather than stability. And as a result of this, I would be concerned about the long-term effects of that particular economy. Ironically enough, the token died a couple of months later, or like at the very least, sort of had a bit of a retrace. And then there's another protocol that we're looking into quite heavily called Hey Anon, which is being run by a guy called Daniel Sester. He did Wonderland Time. Super cool product, like unbelievably cool product. And the token launched at the correct time. It launched into the correct narrative. Again, just totally exploded. And then after all of the DeFi sort of narratives started to ebb away, I think the token was then priced by the market a little bit more in line with what the actual value was, if that makes sense. So I guess to answer the question a bit more straightforward, like I can't think of a single example where the token has just done incredibly well as of late. So when you launch into narratives, you're often launching into an environment that's going to be much more conducive to positivity. One of the things that I say when I talk to founders and stuff is that narrative and market will not always dictate the outcome of your success, but it will have a large impact. It will have an effect. And so it's always worth taking into consideration. I think also though, so from a long-term perspective as well, Sui have been doing fantastic. So like they've been just slow and steady wins the race sort of thing. They've been seeing really consistent, sustainable growth over time. They continue to move up and to the right from a trend perspective without necessarily seeing these big parabolic swings. And I really like that. I think that they're just like fundamentally their technology is fantastic. And the token itself reflects what I think is quite a healthy company in its very early stages. I think Sui could be one of those ones that's going to go for the next 10, 15 years. So yeah, I apologize if that's like sort of like this weird roundabout answer, but it's like it's always like it never feels like one size fits all, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Well, first of all, I think you're totally right about Sui. I think I saw Alex Becker like shilling Sui, or like he had it in one of those videos today. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely getting more traction. And I mean, yeah, they feel like they've always just been in the space. I mean, they've never been, at least for me personally, like they've never been front and center for like the past handful of years. But
Mm,
they're starting to come out and like really show themselves as a team and actually like an ecosystem that
I
is
agree.
really just always there in the background, continuing to build. And I think that's the thing. That's the power of DeFi. And when you have an ecosystem and a network, is exactly the ability to continue to compound and continue to be in the game is
Yeah.
what will make the biggest difference. Because I mean, you could look at projects like Blast, which had a ton of like attention. They had a ton of builders coming on all at once. And then it's kind of like, well, where's Blast now? Like, I don't really
Yeah.
hear of anything from Blast. I think they're working on like mobile stuff, but I really don't know. But Sui, on the
Yeah.
other hand, slowly just compounding, compounding, bringing more folks to the ecosystem. And I mean, if you play that out over, I mean, 5, 10 years, like that's going to be a monster ecosystem, slowly but
Couldn't
surely.
agree more. Yeah, I think it's actually when you mentioned Blast, I immediately also thought about the Ton ecosystem too. So
Yeah.
like same thing, like they just exploded. Now I don't know if the interest sort of petered off because of unfortunately what happened to the Ton founder and like he was like arrested and like that just seems like a
Yeah.
bit of a shit one,
Yeah.
right? But the simple thing was that like the Ton ecosystem was super hot because people realized they could integrate crypto natively into mini apps on Telegram. But I just don't think that that was a long-term compelling enough use case to keep things afoot. I remember sort of seeing it would have been October-ish of last year where it was still sort of quite frothy, but it was like the TVL and the Ton ecosystem was just sort of falling off the face of a cliff. And I was like, ooh, time to pull out of that narrative and sort of look at what's next.
No,
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, obviously, like you said, timing also plays a role. It plays probably
Mm,
a significant role in the short term, but maybe the fundamentals shine through over the longer term. But
yeah.
does that play into anything that you advise for teams is like, do you really worry about the timing, or do you say just focus on the fundamentals? What's your kind of approach there?
Always focus on the fundamentals, but I always like to make sure that we try to give clients the best opportunity. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, the problem with the market is that, Bitcoin could be sitting at $100,000 today, which I think it is sitting almost at $100,000. And then it will drop down to 90 as a very normal, healthy retrace. And everyone will lose their mind and say, it's all over. This is it. We're done. I'm going back to McDonald's sort of thing. Like
Yeah.
the Twitter timeline just gets very toxic very, very quickly when things aren't going up and to the right, even though it's healthy to not necessarily always be doing that. So when I talk to my clients, I'll say, look, like we're going to get you prepared. We're going to get you set up with all the best tools. And then as soon as it feels like for you guys, it's the right time to launch, you can just click the button and you'll be done. And that's how I like to approach it. I'll ultimately you want to give the clients control. They want to be the ones who are in the driver's seat. I can only advise as best as I possibly can as well. But right now, as an example, one of the clients that we're working with is in the agentic space, and they're looking at sort of launching a token. And a month ago, they weren't 100% sure if it was the right time to launch within the next quarter or two. And I was just sort of saying, just keep things in motion, keep the wheels spinning because you don't know when things will change. And now this month, sentiment is swinging back in the right direction. So, and I'm probably going to be pushing them towards a token launch sometime in the next quarter or so. So it's all these things. It's like the market is so dynamic, and you can be you can be super smart, and you can be really clear, and you can have a really good plan. You can execute excellently, but if the market wants to shit on you, you just might get shit on. And I think it's best to try and avoid that at all costs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the game that we're playing. But when it comes
Yeah.
to Tokenize as a product, let's say a founder DMs you, they're about to launch, maybe they just raised or they're going into the raise. They want to work with you. What's kind of that process like end to end?
So we typically do initial consultation, figure out where the client is at, how we can best help them. Then we'll do like a big proposal and do all the data and do all the comms and all that sort of stuff. And then once we've engaged, we go through and do a full sort of reboot from ground up. So we look at all the token design to start off with. We'll look at all of the initial problems that we think they might have. We look at things like, what are the flywheels, the levers that we can pull on to really, get your ecosystem moving. We'll look at things like liquidity ratios. One of the things that we can do on Tokenize itself is that we have like an insights tab. And so we run about 13 different simulations, and then the next version of it will be almost double that. And all these different simulations on the potential projected health or impacts of your token. So we can just load the model in and we can look at it and we can figure out what the next best case is going to be. And then after that, we still do some engineering. We look at all of the mathematics and we run different simulations. A good example of this is like we'll build straight up custom software for clients. So we use like Jupyter notebooks basically, and then we just create like a super simple UI, and we'll do like price prediction models based on different liquidity scenarios. So one of the clients we're working with at the moment, they're doing watch tokenization, and they have a dual token model. And one of the main benefits of the token model is that the protocol itself almost acts as a liquidity backstop for the protocol. So at any one time, the protocol will buy watches off the open market depending on a discount price. And we've modeled out for them what happens at certain price levels or what happens at certain discount levels, and help them to give a better idea of how the ecosystem should function in market before going to market. So we just want to make sure that every founder has the correct data points to do that properly. And then once we've gone through that process, obviously we get them TGE ready and get them out into the world.
Yeah, definitely. And is there like a stage, because you mentioned maybe even like reshaping tokenomics or starting from scratch, like is there a stage ideally projects would reach out?
Ideally is always going to be early stage. Pre-TGE is when it's most malleable. It's just easiest to sort of to shift around and change. But then in future, like the biggest thing that we want to start looking at is different ways to get projects to market that are much more mature. One of the biggest things that I see in the way of where things will start to go is I think ICOs and also IAOs, which is what I'm calling initial asset offerings, I think they'll start to look more like an IPO on a public marketplace. So you can imagine where you start to have less tokens being launched, like less digital assets being launched, much higher quality. And I think the reason for this is because as the space matures and as the space gets more and more regulated, we'll start to see larger and larger, more mature companies coming into the space. Could you imagine if Apple decided to launch a token? Like that would be, and like it sounds outlandish and insane, but one of the assumptions that we're sort of building the company off is basically agents and AI will continue to get better and better and better to the point where people will stop using will stop interfacing with so many different things. They'll just interface with their AI. If you can just message your personal AI to say, hey, go and buy X or go and sell X, so much easier, so much simpler. And if the only type of asset that an AI will be able to transact with is on blockchain, because we just cannot fathom a future where AIs are able to transact on a stock market, I just don't think that's ever going to happen, then eventually all assets will have to be on chain. So Apple's token might not necessarily be a thinly veiled utility token, but maybe a tokenized version of their stock. And when you're working with companies like that, I can't imagine they're just going to use some sort of self-help DIY solution. They're probably going to want to be handheld through that process. And I think that's eventually where we're going to be starting to sort of trend towards. And that's what we're sort of building as a company towards.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And you mentioned a couple of things like obviously RWA right here with tokenized stock, some AI as well. Are you open to like just all verticals? Like, if there's a token on chain, Tokenize wants to be involved.
I agree. Yeah, 100%. And it's mostly because we talk to VCs all the time, and they're all terrified of the idea of investing into anything that describes itself as an everything platform. And I don't know if I'd necessarily just describe ourselves as an everything platform, but the simple fact of the matter is that tokenomics exists at such a deep layer that if you understand tokenomics fundamentally, you could basically create any type of digital asset. Like there's nothing really holding you back as long as you understand how the tokenomics works. And so that's sort of where we see the platform going. We want to become essentially an agentic asset manager where you can come into the platform, you can speak with the agent that we will be providing to you and create the asset that you would like, and then either manage those assets as if you were a founder or manage your portfolio as if you're an investor.
100%. Like I also love the idea of you come to the platform, you have the software that solves, maybe 95% of all of the outstanding like optimizations and stuff like this. And then you have the more custom, like let's say maybe protocol specific, maybe it's like a novel DeFi protocol then on the kind of like the back end of that, you can have the custom white glove solution to work
Yeah.
on some of those like more finer details. Maybe you're engineering something from scratch, integrating it like much deeper, and stuff that basically can't just be done by simulations. And I mean, at that point, you could almost just make the software open or at like a very low cost, and then just off the back end of it, you're getting high ticket like white glove services. There's a lot of ways that you can go with a product like this. But so
Yeah.
what exactly does a platform look like today? Like what's the flow? I get on the platform and you said like it's self-serve at the moment, or maybe is
Yeah.
that future? Like what does it look like today?
Yeah, so as of right now, the way the platform works is you jump in it, it sort of functions very similar to enterprise software. We built it around the premise of essentially getting people out of spreadsheets. One
Yeah.
of the biggest
Yeah.
problems that we've noticed, and so we work with a lot of distribution partners across different accelerators. So we work with like Aptos and XDC and Brink and Foundership and those sorts of guys. One of the things that we noticed off the jump is that founders are really good at breaking their token models. So
Yeah.
what will happen is you as the wonderful mentor will give the founder your spreadsheet that you've poured hours and hours of time into, and then the founder will jump in and change one formula just on accident, and it breaks like 100 different data fields.
Yep.
And so then as a founder, you have to take your spreadsheet and you have to go back to the workshop person and you have to ask them if they can redo the model. And it's like it sounds really quite minuscule, but when you're doing that across like hundreds of projects
Yep.
each year, across all of these different accelerator verticals, it's a lot of time and a lot of
Yeah.
wasted money. And so, very simply, our platform just doesn't break. So you
Yeah.
can jump in and you can build out your models and you can have a much more robust experience. You have better version control, all those sorts of things. So it's definitely focused more towards businesses and to people who are a bit more understanding of how tokenomics works, even though we've made it really, really simple. The next version is going to be we're going to be rolling out alpha in about a month and a half. And the where the platform is going is you'll be able to jump in and we'll take you through like an onboarding experience.
Yeah.
It's like 7 slides, 7 pages. You go through the onboarding experience, and at the end of it, you will create a custom tokenomics template that is like 75%, 80% accurate to your use case just by answering the questions that we're asking you.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a big shift where now you actually don't need to you don't need to know what tokenomics are. You just have to answer our questions. And then you'll be able to build out your tokenomics model. And then of course the logical next step of that is totally agentic. So
Yeah.
we're going to have like we're going to build in a co-pilot. The co-pilot will function as your buddy. You'll be able to jump in, talk to the co-pilot. Co-pilot will build a tokenomics model for you. The reason why we're doing a co-pilot is because I'm a huge believer in beautiful UX for the sake of beautiful
Yeah.
UX. I would be very depressed and sad if the all we do from now on is chatbots, like as the only UX solution,
Yeah.
which I see a lot on Twitter these days. Like people are just like, why do I need UX anymore? If I can just talk to my AI, like it would make me really sad.
Yeah.
So so like, that's going to be the next evolution where the AI functions as your co-pilot, to the point where you would have one agent across all different parts of the business. So, imagine a platform where you can jump in, your agent will help to build out your digital asset for you. It'll then launch it depending on where you need it to be launched. So you'll tell it what the use case is and it will suggest Solana if you're a meme coin, or it will suggest Base if you're DeFi or whatever. You launch it, and then when you're monitoring it and managing it, the AI will be able to tell you, okay, Owen, your liquidity slippage risk just shot through the roof. This is because your volume has started to increase, but your liquidity is remaining thin. Next month, this is the risk parameters. We would suggest adding some liquidity to reduce this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And now you're a founder working with your AI, working with your Javas basically to keep your token health in proper check and to get in front of any potential risks that you might not be able to see that your AI will.
Yeah, and I imagine this takes away a lot of the low-hanging fruit that you guys used to probably go through. Now that's
Yeah,
all just taken out and totally automated. And then you can
yeah.
get to the more complex bits if need be. But I mean, is this a complete solution to the tokenomics problem, or is there other stuff that has to happen manually today?
Well, when we get to an agentic platform, the assumption is that it will be a complete solution to the tokenomics
No.
problem. I don't think you'd ever need to use anything else for tokenomics at that point.
Yeah.
What will what we'll start to look at, and the way that we pitch ourselves to investors is that we say that we're the JP Morgan of digital assets. And it sounds, again, very outlandish and a little bit
It
ignorant,
has
to
to
be
be.
super honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly right. Like that's the only way the investors will buy in.
Yeah.
But that's actually legitimately how I see us sort of like moving. So to a certain degree, one of the biggest problems that we see in the space at the moment is that people are still like it's super challenging. It's full of friction, and if you can help to reduce a lot of that in the way of creating these assets and then managing these assets in real time, regardless of whether or not you're a founder, a project owner, a capital manager, whatever it might be, if you can create an ecosystem that makes it really simple to just work with your portfolio, we think that's a really big step. So that's the ultimate goal. I think that's like the 5 to 10 year plan, and we'll see if we ever end up getting there.
What's like a common problem that a project will have after they get the token launched and they've done their tokenomics? Like, let's say somebody comes into the platform, they use their agent to accomplish everything there, and they've got the right liquidity set, they've got the right model for whatever kind of utility it's going to be, and then they launch the token. What's the next problem that a founder has after they use that?
It's funny, like the biggest problem is they sit back and relax.
Yeah.
So like they think their job's done for some reason. And when we talk to founders, we say, no, as soon as you launch, it's actually going to be way, way harder to just keep your project alive and to keep you in market. And that's the largest problem. So it's like shifting that mentality and then giving them the correct tools to be able to do it properly. If you're in market right now, you have to be, you're so fragmented across different things. So treasury management is usually one area. Vesting distribution is one area. Figuring out what the price of your token is doing, that's another area. Yeah. Figuring out how your liquidity is moving or supplying liquidity into your liquidity pool, that's another area. So all of these different things are fragmented across your ecosystem. You have to hire internally to figure out, like, to either aggregate all of that and have like some genius who's super Web3 degenerate, who's native and knows what to do. You have to hire somebody like that, or you have to teach yourself, or maybe just use a really good tool that aggregates all of it.
And then, of course, it becomes like the hub for post-launch. You need to manage all of these risks that come up, and you need to be able to like act on them and get more liquidity in, maybe even like get in contact with market makers and facilitate that process.
All of the existing tooling that is in the space right now it's fantastic to be a tool, but it's not smart. It's not intelligent. It doesn't tell you where the risks are. It doesn't tell you what's about to go wrong. It doesn't tell you what's potentially going right. Yeah. It just gives you data. And I would be more interested in information or intelligent information, not just data.
100%. If you just have the data, then it's almost like, okay, well, now I need somebody in my org who understands this data and can...
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, so it's essentially removing the need for that and making it much more intuitive. I mean, it's something that you almost change it from something that somebody who, like a C-suite, has to hire somebody to like manage and monitor it, to remove that person, and just somebody who's in C-suite can, check in with this every couple of weeks, or maybe even have like alerts set up, stuff like this. Yeah, so it just absolutely streamlines that process. And I love the idea of like, let's make launching a token and getting the right fundamentals and the right use case and all this stuff and the right liquidity model. Let's make that as easy and streamlined as possible with like the lowest barrier to entry. And then once you get, that's like kind of the first hit of like, okay, this application is really useful, and that experience was delightful, and we just solved this super hard problem that everybody struggles with and fucks up.
Yeah.
And now you've got the user, you've got the customer essentially. Now the real work begins, and now the app, that's when the application starts to become 10 times as useful, because hey, now we need to have continuous monitoring, continuous management of all of these. And hey, by the way, you're probably going to want to be able to interpret like what the issues are and how to actually solve them. We can do all of that for you in the platform.
Exactly right. I mean, like the tracking product that's going to hit the market in about a month and a half, if it was just a prototype and it just turned out the prototype was really good. Yeah. And if we'd had a direct line to JP over at Mantra, we could have said to him, hey man, we just saw a 45% spike in your inflation rate. Something's about to go very badly wrong. Please do something. Yeah. Like, You know what I mean? Like supply some liquidity or take this action or do X or do Y to just potentially save a couple $1 billion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's, you know what I mean? And it's just like,
And the
bro,
entire project.
exactly. And it's just like that's where the power of I think information, intelligent information is
Yeah.
really sort of lends itself to. Simply just giving someone the data, even if they're a very bright person, it may not always be super obvious to someone. It's just better to act as that sort of informative agent. So yeah, I know that's sort of definitely something that we're working towards.
Absolutely. What a great case study to have. Like, hey, by the way, Ohm would, or is it Om? I don't even know. Mantra would not have crashed if they had this alerting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's just a perfect like, hey, there's a pretty clear pain point here. And I'm sure, I mean, with something like this, it's exciting because you could even just start like permissionlessly monitoring a lot of these tokens and just like see what goes on out there and reach out to teams. I mean that could even be like a go-to-market
It
like
is
strategy.
exactly, literally, exactly what we're doing.
Okay. Yeah,
It's
I could imagine.
it's amazing that you like just sort of nailed that. Like that's yeah. I won't spoil too much, but the prototype has very much evolved into something quite amazing, and that's sort of like the thinking that we currently have. Any way that we can sort of help people. It's ironic because we on Twitter we were posting this. We were like if we had a direct line to JP, we may have been able to help him save a couple
Yeah.
billion. And the first thing anyone writes is, "Oh, it's bullshit because if it was true, you'd just short it and make money." And I was like, maybe, but it's unfortunate. Like that's just not our prerogative. I'm
Yeah.
not actually interested in sucking value out of the space. I would much rather try to keep value inside the space.
Yeah.
The biggest problem, one of the biggest problems we have in Web3 is it's so PvP. And
Yeah.
I'm not really about that. I would prefer to find ways to make money that's not trying to rip somebody else off.
Yeah, I mean it's also like after you figure out like okay, like I can make a decent amount of money and I can, I can pay for my living expenses, etc., and not have to really
Mm,
worry about stuff. Then it's like, am I really gonna go to the most malicious like way to make money? Like I don't like I want to make money in a way that's first of all ideally enjoyable for me.
yeah,
And second of all,
yeah,
like actually lets you sleep at night and provide value,
yeah.
like valuable connections with other people and like move like the coolest industry on earth forward, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
I
couldn't agree
mean,
more.
100%. I mean, it sounds like what you guys have built is like truly pretty exciting. So interested to see how that adoption comes. And I mean, if you guys are doing outbound with it, you guys already know what you're doing. So uh,
Yeah, well, I mean, like we've managed to crack super early distribution. I mean, when you're talking to an accelerator and you say, "Hey, this is how we can help your founders," within 30 seconds, they're like, "Okay, this is
wow,
amazing. How do we integrate this?"
that's
So
it.
that's a fantastic like it's basically the zero play. It was exactly what zero did, and so
Yep.
that's just what we're going to keep doing. And the basically the process is going to be standardized. We're not super big or loud with our marketing. But I guarantee you within the next 6 to 12 months, people won't be using spreadsheets anymore. They'll be using
Yeah,
Tokenize.
100%. That's so exciting, man. I mean, like that position to be in is like, I don't know, dude. I wouldn't even be able to sleep at night, just like the excitement of like getting everybody onto your platform. So um,
To tell you the truth, I've been thinking about getting a Whoop, and I
yeah,
decided not to because I don't want it to tell me how bad my sleep is at the moment.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So what would you say is like the bottleneck on the business at the moment?
Largest bottleneck that I think we are having at the moment is just simply we're trying to grow really quickly,
Yeah,
and the resource is probably the biggest problem. Ironically enough, we are thinking we're probably going to open up a new seed round really quite soon. So we did our pre-seed back in February, and that was allocated within 3 days.
yep,
And now we've gone through this big growth period. We got a ton of feedback, 6 months ago that we just looked too much like a consulting business, and so
yeah,
we're like, well, fuck it, we just need to push the product to market. We've
hmm,
got it in market, and we're already seeing hockey stick growth on user adoption curves, which is really cool.
yep,
And so it's like right now we have this wonderful little fire, and now we just need fuel to dump on it
Yep.
And we're pretty damn convinced it's going to turn into a massive bomb, right? I know most projects are going to say, oh, my largest bottleneck right now is resources, but ours actually is
Yeah.
resources. And
Yeah.
I imagine that will be solved really quite soon.
100%. I mean, like, what have you guys done? I imagine a lot of it is like on the technical side, hiring and finding the right fits there. What have you guys
Yeah.
done so far to try to solve that?
So we've got we've actually brought in a new AI specialist recently. He's like studying a master's degree at one of the best technology universities in Australia at the moment. And then we've got another guy that we're thinking about bringing on who's studying quantum AI, go figure. And he's doing a PhD at another really good technology university. So we're really interested in bringing more AI agentically into the company. And then from an agentic perspective, so we are huge believers in making the company as efficient as possible. So
Yeah.
our entire sales process, our entire outbound process, all agentic. So we
Oh,
have like, email campaigns that are constantly being triggered. All of our content right now is agentic. So what we do is me and one of my founding team members, we record video once a week. So we'll do like an hour interview and we'll talk about what's going on. We'll do product updates and blah, blah, blah. And then we just stick it into our agent. It'll tear it up into different pieces and then distribute it across
oh,
YouTube, LinkedIn, X, all that sort of stuff. So all of that process is totally automated. The outbound sales process is totally automated. And then, like I said, our distribution players is we're not trying to work with founders directly because it's just way too time consuming for the
yeah.
uplift. We just go to accelerators and we'll say, hey, use our software. We'll give your founders some sort of discount to use the software as part of going through your program. We'll do workshops with your founders when necessary. So we'll jump on for an hour or
Yeah.
two and we'll work with them and help them get their tokenomics up to scratch, just as long as you use our product. And that's also having a really big effect. So it's like anywhere that we can be super efficient right now, we just are.
That's excellent. And I can imagine, so,
Yeah.
I mean, you're getting a ton of users on board. What's your pipeline for like user feedback? Because I can imagine at this stage, that's like gold to you guys.
Yeah. It is like the most manual process of the business, actually. So every time we get a new user onto the platform, I try to ping them. So I get their email, I track down whatever social profile I can track down. I'll reach out to them,
Yep.
ask them how they're, do you like the platform? What do you hate about it? What are your biggest sort of like issues that you're having with it at the moment? And then we've been forming relationships with customers. So I like regularly talk to my customers about, what bugs did they have? Or, hey, Daniel, can you quickly help me with this or whatever? So it's like a super manual process, but it's like you can't have your finger on a better pulse than talking directly with your customers, basically. So
100%.
that's
Yeah.
like we took a leaf out of the Y Combinator playbook, like basically just obsess over customer satisfaction and talk to them as much as you possibly can. And so that's essentially what we've been doing.
Absolutely. I mean, that's to me the hardest part about SaaS is retaining the users. So I mean, like you said,
Yeah,
you've pretty much solved the outbound, getting more users on board. And like, I mean, it sounds
yeah,
like you made it pretty efficient, which is really awesome. But yeah, the hardest part is getting the product like dialed in. And it's such a it's a painstaking process, but it's also like an exciting one because it's you just make like 1,000 minor iterations. Like there's no one thing that you'll change and it will make like, oh, your SaaS retains
no,
100% of users year over year. But it's like all these like little iterations and things that you wouldn't even think of if you didn't like hop on a call with the user and see how they're like using the application. And then
yeah.
and then even like getting into like split testing stuff in the UI. Yeah.
Oh, it's like it comes down to even just like a single word can
Yeah.
change the
Yeah.
customer experience. So like we used to call the public round the featured round. We defined it as the featured round just because it was like the round that was on the homepage and it was the featured round. No one got it. Everyone was like, what the fuck is a featured round? What does that make? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And we just changed it to public round. And they were like, oh, right. That's my
Yeah.
public round. Okay, I get it now. You know what I mean? So it's just like
Absolutely.
even those things that you would never have thought of, people want to see because it makes it feel more familiar and it cuts down that learning curve even more.
Yeah, and they want to know that it's for them. Like I
Yeah,
think a lot of it is how do you get the messaging right so that when especially with SaaS, when I go to a website and I'm looking at some kind of SaaS product, I need to know, does this solve specifically the, niche problem that I have? And if it does, I'm going to buy it. If it doesn't, I don't. And
yeah.
then if you get that messaging right, then you're going to have hockey stick growth, like you
I
said.
couldn't agree
And
more.
What is your retaining, like your retention metrics? Like, what do they look like? Do you guys typically like keep, I mean, this software is great because you have their token. I don't know if you can maybe make it like really sticky with their token. But it's like you've got their token, they launched it within your platform. So I imagine is the
Mm.
retention really strong or what does it look like?
Yeah, so well, actually, so for the time being, we haven't let founders launch their tokens just yet
Yeah,
because sorry, that's a
that's
lie.
true.
Sorry, they can launch it on testnet. They can't launch it on mainnet.
Yeah.
And I think that's obviously going to be a point that is a little bit unsticky because once you're on mainnet, like you sort of have to stay in the one spot. It's quite hard
Yeah.
to sort of shift. It becomes quite rigid quite quickly. However, the retention rate is still really quite high. And I think that's because one of the core features of the platform is that when you come in and you build out a token, you start off with building out project rooms, and your project room almost functions as your data room. So you can create both tokenomic models and also plain text files,
Yeah.
meaning you can stick in your white papers, you can stick in SAFs if you want to, you can put in safe agreements, anything that you would put into a Google document, you can
Yep.
put into the Tokenized platform. And so that's essentially one of the key moats of the product is that the more data you add into Tokenize, the more entrenched you become within the tokenized
Yeah.
ecosystem and the harder it is to leave. So all the retention metrics obviously increase the more that users are adding like files to the platform essentially and
Yeah.
adding data to the platform. So that's a key thing that we see. And obviously the way we increase that is to reduce friction points and add
Yep.
all different file types and blah 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 blah. But yeah, for the time being, we're still technically in like an invite only phase. Basically, it's
Yeah.
just that we sort of call it an invite only phase that got out of hand. We gave it to 12 users like 2 months ago, and it's just organically grown to like several hundred. Basically,
Wow.
we're nearly at like 1,000 monthly active users just through word of mouth.
That's excellent. That sounds like a good
Yeah,
machine to start pouring money into.
well, like the what we didn't realize was going to happen, and is super obvious in hindsight, is that you give the founder access to the platform, and they share it with about five other people, and
Yeah.
those five other people are typically other founders in the team, other team members,
Yeah.
investors, or community members, and
Yep.
so it just has this insane network effect where you do it once, and then you just share it with all these people, and then they share it with people.
Yeah.
Actually, funnily enough, so in the first couple of weeks, this is a good story. In the first couple of weeks, we ran into a problem. When we first launched it, we forced people to log in with their Google account. That was mostly because we just wanted the account information and we wanted to be able to reach out to customers and have
Yeah.
conversations with them, right? But then within about a week, we realized that our bounce rate shot through the roof. And it was because it had gotten like several people removed from that initial 12 who knew
Yeah.
us personally. So it gets to like the fourth or fifth removed person, and they're like, "Well, I don't know Daniel, and this platform was just shared with me randomly. I'm not going to put my Google account information into it." And so we hit this bizarre bottleneck because that we didn't foresee was going to happen for at least a
Yeah.
couple of months because of how quickly it grew. And so within like a week, we deployed a fix where you could just jump in and you didn't have to sign up with a Google account anymore. You just
Yeah.
had a bit more flexibility. Bounce rate was cut in half pretty much overnight.
I love those issues that just kind of like get revealed to you through adoption. Like you didn't even realize this stuff that
You
was so
just wouldn't
great.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah. You just never know. Yeah.
absolutely. That's kind of like the funnest part about designing SaaS is like you have the system and you think it's built for X amount of usage, and then you get there and then you even go beyond it, and then you're like, oh, actually, this is a huge problem. And then it's like an easy fix. That's like the most beautiful
Yeah.
thing. Like I love the little, like it's just a little fix. Like you said, like changing a word, and it just gives you
Yeah.
like 10x return on that
Yeah.
single. It's crazy how reality is in that sense sometimes.
It can be magical sometimes, to be honest, to just sort of watch it all happen. I mean, we didn't think we were
Yeah.
going to hit hockey stick growth. We had this bad internal issue where we had like the data that we were being fed was not the correct data. So I've got two guys in my team who are seeing the correct data. I'm seeing the wrong data, and the wrong data made it look like we were dead in the water. The data I was getting was like we'd stopped having new accounts being signed up. And
Yeah.
it was going on for like 3 weeks. And I was like, okay, maybe people are just not using it as much right now and they'll start to use it again. I don't know. And I was getting super antsy. And one Friday I finally sort of like I was like, guys, like what the fuck is going on? Like no one likes us anymore. Why is this happening? And the two guys just looked at me like I sort of walked into the room backwards, and they were like, "No, things are going really, really well. What are you looking at?" And we realized we had data mismatches internally. So it's like, it's just like those moments that cause horrible anxiety and then just like immediate stress
Yeah,
relief.
that's wonderful, dude. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And I mean, like, what is the tech stack? Like, I'm interested if you know, like, what are the main technologies you guys are using to manage this?
Pretty straightforward. So all of the blockchain stuff. So right now we're fully EVM compatible. We've got some Solana in there. So it's like, Solidity, and then Solana's Rust, I'm pretty sure. And
Yeah.
then front end is being built using Svelte,
Okay.
which is like it was like a framework designed mostly for like news articles and content agencies. But the biggest advantage of it is that it's just like super snappy and really, really clean. It's like
Yeah.
if you've ever used the platform, you can just like tab between tabs and everything loads pretty much instantly. It's like it feels really good. And then backend is just TypeScript.
Excellent.
Yeah, so super super clean, super straightforward. We're just trying to make sure that the tech stack can evolve over time. We've actually the addition we're really excited about is I just reserved the project DGX Spark from NVIDIA, which is like the Blackwell supercomputer that sits on your desktop, basically. And so that's going to be, it's like a full, I think you can put an LLM into it up to 200 billion parameters. So when we get access to that, I imagine that's going to boost our AI game really quite quickly.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I imagine so you've got a lot of folks that are like really well trained in AI and they've done like
Yeah.
some really insane research there. Is there
Yeah.
any kind of a speed bump when you bring them into the crypto space? Like, do they have to get up to speed with everything? What is that like?
I don't think so at all. I mean, maybe generally, but like
Yeah.
we've been so lucky. I've been so spoiled. I hired this guy as an intern for Tokenomics.
Yeah.
And then turns out he's a genius at math and also AI. And so now I've been actually pushing him more towards the AI side of the business as
Yeah.
that side of the business starts to grow. So he's just absolutely brilliant. University student. He's, about my age. So what, like early 20s,
Yeah.
and like just an absolute cold hearted killer. And it's the exact same story with this guy in quantum AI that we think like we're going to sort of look at hiring too.
Yeah.
So we're just like, honestly, I've just gotten lucky as hell.
That's wonderful, man. I mean, yeah, the team, especially with something like this, the team is so important to have that like
Yeah.
really concentrated talent to be able to actually like deliver on a product like this. And I mean, it sounds like you guys have been and you've got the right folks in place. So I mean, exciting times ahead.
You, you have to have the right people on the bus. We
Yeah.
certainly haven't been this lucky all the time. We've actually had people come through the business who were just like absolutely not right for the
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
But then in those situations, you just sort of like part ways as amicably as possible, and you find the right people to get on the bus. And I think right now we've got some pretty excellent people sitting on the bus right now.
That's awesome, man. But yeah, dude, I'm excited to see the growth in the coming weeks, months, and over the next year. I think a lot more people will start hearing about Tokenize. I mean, it sounds like it's a pretty viralizing product, so uh, yeah, that's exciting, man. But
Hopefully.
anything else? Any new features we should maybe shout out? I know in like a month and a half, you guys are releasing the new like monitoring and like sort of agentic
Yeah.
side of the application. Is there anything
Yeah.
else big you guys are releasing soon?
So all of that stuff is going to be coming out. So it's basically we have app.tokenize, which is where you can build everything, and there's going to be track.tokenize, which is all of the real-time monitoring. We're pulling in real-time data as well. So we pull in your token data as well as everybody else's data. So
Awesome.
if you're someone who is interested, you can actually just jump in and look at anything that's been listed on CoinGecko as an
That's really
example.
cool.
So it's pretty chill, right? And so I guess other features. So you'll be able to jump into Tokenize. Like I said, you'll be able to jump in and do your onboarding process. So if you have no idea what tokenomics are and have no idea what mathematics are, you'll still be able to create templates that will fit your project use case, which is really cool. And if you want to, you can then compare your token to other tokens. So you'll actually physically be able to jump into the platform and have your tokenomics model and have a token that you like. You'll have their tokenomics model and you can just copy it over. And we've got I think we've got something like 250 token models that you can copy from that we'll be going live with very, very shortly. And so the whole platform is going to act as this curated advisory style coach that will coach you through the process of creating, launching, and managing your digital assets if you don't know how to do it. And even if you do know how to do it, it's going to make your life really easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Just be a seamless experience overall.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent, man. Well, yeah, dude. I mean, I think we've covered pretty much everything. I mean, you guys are just in a really exciting spot right now, so we'll see how it plays out for you guys, and hopefully you guys open the floodgates and it just starts to compound and compound like month over month. So excited to see what the future brings for you guys there. But I mean, to be honest, dude, appreciate you hopping on and walking through all this stuff with us. And
No, thank you.
I mean, yeah, dude, just really exciting time for you guys.
Thanks so much for your time. This has been wonderful. I haven't done one of these in a while, so this has been really cool. I appreciate it.
Awesome.